The language here gets mixed up. Usually we hear about people, well, if they have a terminal condition, why give them an organ if they're going to die anyway? These aren't people that are going to die anyway. These are people with disabilities.
We did a commentary recently about the crisis of illegal discrimination in organ donations, discrimination specifically against those with disabilities who are kind of being viewed in that field as unworthy of receiving these organs. That their life is not as valuable as other people's lives. So we got a question in regard to that, and it's a very good question as to how we sort out, how we do the sort of moral work around who lives, who dies, who gets organs, because there's a very real sort of set of decisions that need to be made there. This person asks, I agree that people with disabilities should not be deemed unworthy of transplant. That said, with the imbalance of supply and demand, what do you propose is an ethical way to choose who is at the head of the line? I worked in kidney transplant. I'm a PA. And I can tell you, even without the disability issue, the system is corrupt.
Well, first of all, that question doesn't give me much hope that there's a way to fix it. Just starting with the line from somebody from the inside that the system is corrupt. I think that
Right.
this is an issue fraught with all kinds of ethical problems. Even the very idea of organ donation, which I know we're going to get some hate mail from. But let me just start here with really what this story that we covered was about. It was really a story reflecting, again, how people with disabilities are considered less valuable, less human in a sense. This story came right on the heels of another story we did about British doctors adding a do not resuscitate order without consulting with the patients that have disability or their caretakers or their guardians when it came to COVID-19 orders, as they were dealing with kind of limited resources there. The organ transplant issue is the problem is a problem because we don't have enough quote unquote organs from healthy people to go to people who need it. This was a problem because COVID-19. This other story was a problem because COVID-19 taxed the emergency facilities, and there has to be some level of triage making a decision who gets care and who doesn't. And of course, this is kind of like on what you do in a battlefield, limited number of medical professionals. You have to take care of people that are quote unquote beyond hope that they're going to die. They're actually, you can't actually save their lives, but the care of somebody else needs to be prioritized or you're going to lose their life. That's the sort of decisions that you make on the battlefield.
Hmm.
So
So the difference you're illustrating here, John, is between allocating scarce resources and actually deciding, who's worthy of life and who's not.
Well,
That's
that's how
triage. It's a
this is
very
being
different sort of
treated. That's
thing.
how the organ transplant thing is being treated. And what I wanted to point out is that there are all kinds of reasons not to treat it like. So, for example, to put someone with disability lower on the list, someone who has a disability but is not terminal. Does that make sense? The language here gets
Right.
mixed up. Usually we hear about people, well, if they have a terminal condition, why give them an organ if they're going to die anyway? These aren't people that are going to die anyway. These are people with disability. So you're judging that the rest of their life is less valuable because they have disability, not because what they have is going to kill them. It's that what they have is something that they're never going to actually get over. Does that make sense? That's a fundamental difference in how this whole thing is seen. Second, to call this a crisis is really interesting. We've only been transplanting organs for, a few decades, 50 or some odd years. And it's a remarkable thing
Hmm.
that we're able to do. And it's one thing when you can actually um, offer this as hope to people who otherwise would have had no way forward in their lives. But where do those organs typically come from? With some exceptions, like someone donating a kidney or something like that. But those organs typically come from somebody dying. So think about this language and this way
Mhm.
of thought. The crisis is not a shortage of organs. The crisis that we call a crisis is actually what? Waiting for people to die. Now, I think that the ability to 3D print organs is going to be a remarkable achievement. I think our ability to take skin cells, reprogram them to a level of pluripotency, this is called induced pluripotent stem cells, which isn't the same thing as embryonic stem cells, in which you have to kill an embryo in order to get the stem cell. But you can take an adult stem cell, make it behave like an embryo, and then use that to grow skin
Mm.
tissue and potentially useful, organs of some level. This is what we're on the verge of. None of these things create the sort of ethical dilemma that we're in now. But I do think to answer this person's question, we do have to start with that concern. And that concern is that we do not um, use things like IQ, uh, some sort of certain physical capacities to judge the value and dignity of someone. To put someone in a triage situation or put them down the line in a triage situation when they have just as much chance to survive as anybody else, but the difference is some disability means that you're using some random characteristic in order to judge human value. And it's just reflective of so many other things in our culture in which people with disability are devalued. So, I hate to leave you with that good news, but this is a mess. This is an absolute mess.
Well, it sounds like the questioner knows that it's a mess, and if I could venture a guess, John, when I took a bioethics course, one of the things that the writer of the textbook emphasized was that there's no agreed upon criterion in the medical industry for deciding what a life is worth. There are all these different criteria floating around that sort of people use to measure the worthiness of a person to receive medical treatment, or to even live. And the image of God, which gives us an objective foundation for human value, is that old framework that Christians have always worked on. But it's not at all clear that a majority of medical professionals are still operating on that framework. Now, they may have really good intentions, and they may want to sort of save as many people as possible and approach things from a utilitarian standpoint, and they may genuinely be convinced that that what they're doing in denying someone who has a disability an organ they need in favor of someone they consider more worthy who's further back on the line is the right thing. But if we adopt an objective as opposed to a subjective conception of human value, then we can't have that sort of thinking at the heart of it. And so, to me, John, the challenge is going to be for anyone in this profession, as our listener is going to be to sort out what are the criterion for deciding these sorts of things, and how do we, as Christians, in the midst of a profession that doesn't universally uphold our view of human value, nevertheless stand up for it and witness to it and try to convince other people that, look, there is no such thing as a life unworthy of life. There's no such thing as people who don't have that inherent dignity and worth given by being bearers of God's image. It doesn't matter what their IQ. It doesn't matter what their physical appearance is. They are created in God's image. That means they're human beings worthy of the same respect as anyone else. And there are moral ways to allocate resources with that realization. I think it's the only moral way to allocate resources. But we've got a missionary job on our hands as well as a medical ethics job.